pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I just had 4 items to add to the agenda. We can add, well, 2 of them are language updates to items number 9 and number 10. And I would be in favor of moving both of those to the consent agenda after I update the language. So number 9, it should read Mohonk Avenue and Route 208 project, payment estimate number 1 in the amount of $27,436.17. Approval of payment estimate number 1, final for contract number Village of New Paltz 173 regarding Mohonk Avenue. And 2, Casa Builders, Inc., doing business as Friedlander Construction of New Paltz. So that's related to the intersection project at Mohonk and 208. And then item number 10, before we move it into the consent agenda, the language should be payment estimate number 5, wastewater treatment plant floating cover, approval of payment estimate number 5 for contract number VNP 162 regarding the floating steel digester cover and appenditures project in the amount of $95,475 to CFI Contracting of Johnstown, New York.
And what, I heard that, what was the original language? What was changed from the original language?
No, just the original language didn't have detail.
On the item.
So that was just, they were just listed without enough detail to make it into the minutes properly. So that's why we're just making sure that they're in the minutes properly. And then the other 2 items, we can add both of these to the end of the agenda. One is related to authorizing the hiring of seasonal winter help, and then the other is related to the rail trail connection from the property at North Chestnut, which is owned by Net Zero Development LLC. And
I think that the rail trail thing, Eve is here for that, and Michael Zeeler is going to be here, but he's not even going to get here till 7:20, so.
Want to just
we
move it
can
up
move it up a
if
little
Michael shows up?
closer.
Well, let's just.
Or just do it when Michael shows up.
When Michael shows up, we'll move it. I guess we'll have to do the same thing.
Also rec fees, I don't know if we're having a conversation, but I know Eve's here for that as well.
I don't see Mark Eisenhandler here. Okay, so we can push through with this agenda.
Why don't we just do, I don't know if we're getting any rec fee stuff from Bill and Don, but we can just put that after Rail Trail Zero, please, whenever that happens.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm kind of lost where what are we adding, or what are we?
We've got 14 rec fees.
Yeah.
Which has been an ongoing thing. I don't know if we're getting anything new from
The
Don
board.
and Bill.
There's nothing new for me on this.
And I had prepared a document that I emailed to the board, essentially taking the email that Bryant had sent out and putting it into a form with links. Click here for a website, here's the phone numbers of the various people. I had emailed that to the board, so you all should have had a chance to see that. I wanted to go over that tonight.
Oh, so let's discuss that topic as it stands now. And
Okay.
Okay.
Let's just do it
not move
after
anything
Zero,
around.
please.
So I motion that we accept the consent agenda as amended.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I'm going to abstain on that because those changes on the things, I didn't get a chance to see them in advance, and I don't really know what we're voting on.
It's 2 payments. One is for Mohonk Ave and one
I don't
is
process
for-
verbally very well. I didn't see it in
Okay,
writing. It's
I
a
just
lot of
wanted to
money.
make sure
I don't
you
want
knew
to.
what
I don't want
it
to vote
was.
on a lot of money without knowing what I'm voting on.
Okay, so we have 4 approved the consent agenda, and 1 said nay. All right.
Or abstained.
Okay, motion to accept the business agenda as amended, because we removed items 9 and 10.
Yep.
Second.
All in
Is there
favor?
anything else? Okay, I thought there might be other stuff we could take off, but.
No, let's
I
just,
guess
we'll
we'll do
deal
it
with
when
it,
we get there.
we'll deal with it as we go. Okay, so I guess we'll wait if Ariana comes. She was gonna give us,
Can we do announcements?
yes.
Open comment?
Yep, sorry. You're gonna do an announcement, KT?
I have 3, actually.
Go ahead.
The first is that we're going to do the Christmas tree bonfire on January 6th. And the details, Alex, people can put their trees out on the street, and DPW will pick them up until Friday at 1, the day before. What else do people need to know?
Or you can bring them.
You can bring them to DPW, your tree, ahead of time, or you can just show up with your tree that day. And what time? 5 o'clock. In the park.
Saturday, January 6th.
Second one is, I just wanted to quickly rattle off all the committees that we have openings on. Planning Board, ZBA, Affordable Housing, Shade Tree Commission, Historic Preservation, Environmental Policy Board, Ethics Board, and Landlord Tenant Board. I believe it's just tenant spots that are open.
Is there a
So if
board
you're
or-
looking to do some volunteerism and for your New Year's resolution, we have lots of opportunities here in the village, and I believe also at the town as well. And you can check out their website. They have a listing of what all their committee and board openings are.
Is there a board or commission that has the full number of people?
Shade Tree Commission is at 5 right now.
Well, you just included Shade Tree.
I did. Oh, okay, so if we appoint Mark tonight, then it won't, right?
I just talked to the chair this afternoon. She was thinking in terms of Mark being appointed as an alternate. However, somebody we already appointed a year ago is not a resident of the village, so we'll have to figure that out.
Okay. And if you want more information on these different boards and committees, you can just go to the village website, go to the drop-down that says boards and commissions, and they each have an individual web page. The last announcement is I asked Dan Torres to come just so he could let people know about the details of pre-made prepayment of town taxes. Villages don't qualify, but towns do. And just to be clear, this is not a recommendation that anybody should do or not do prepayment. It's just how you should do prepayment. There's a lot of details that you should inform yourself about, including talking to your tax preparer if you're interested in prepaying your town taxes. But if you want to do it, Dan will quickly let us know how people can do that.
Thank you, guys. Also, just an interesting note, about an hour ago, the IRS just ruled that they would accept prepayments as well. That had been kind of one of the outstanding things with this. But if people are interested in doing this, we received the tax bills today. So what we are going to do is they're going to be mailed out. If they weren't mailed out today, they'll be mailed out tomorrow. And I realize that does not give people a lot of time to be able to prepay your taxes if you choose to do so. Just to kind of a little bit of background here, the governor signed an executive order at about 5 o'clock on Friday, which allowed us to do this, and that's why we're kind of scrambling to make it happen. If you want to prepay your taxes, you are able to pay either half of the amount or the full amount. You cannot pay just a random number or last year's taxes as well. So in order for you to be able to have that number, you can either wait for the mail to come, which I can't say at this point exactly when it'll be there, or you can contact the town clerk either in person or by email. You can call as well, but based on my experience at town hall today, there was like 40 voicemails when we got into the office, so it might be hard to reach someone. So I would recommend email. They were doing very well at just emailing people back so they can have that number. Once you get that number, you can choose to pay there in person, or you can mail your check as well, as long as it's postmarked prior to January 1st. We're also allowing people to leave a check outside town hall. There's a mailbox there too. So it's not a recommendation. It's not necessarily going to work for everyone. It's based on all of your state, school, and local taxes, as well as your income tax. If that is over $10,000, you will no longer be able to deduct after that $10,000 figure. So that's why some people are choosing.
For certain households,
For certain
depending on how you
households,
file
yes.
your taxes.
So that's why some people are choosing to prepay now. We're not necessarily recommending it. It may make sense for you. In the event you want to do that, you should act very soon. So that's pretty much the update, unless anyone has any questions about that.
What's the deadline for the Dropbox?
The Dropbox will be checked on Tuesday, and I feel pretty confident that whatever is there, we will believe was taken prior to January 1st. So, okay, great.
Thanks, Dan.
One last announcement. On January 17th, we'll be having a workshop meeting to review the franchise waste bid process. Is there anything else scheduled for that workshop meeting as of yet?
No?
No? All right.
Well, what we normally do is whenever we
Whatever else.
call for a meeting, we say, whatever the meeting might be intended for, plus any other lawful business. That's what our attorney always advises us. So we should probably add that to our agenda, that we're setting that announcement for a meeting. Okay. I'm going to add that as the first item that we do.
Okay.
So anyone here for public comment? No. Okay, we accepted the consent agenda? Okay, so first item on the business agenda, I motion that we hold a special meeting on January 17th to discuss the single hauler RFP and any other lawful business.
Second.
At 7 PM. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So we're waiting to see if Ariana shows up. She was going to give us an end-of-the-year report on the open-air market that took place at Church Street. Number 2 on this agenda, this is really straightforward stuff in that we had a resolution that our board supported a few months back now, and this is a proposal that's being considered in Albany regarding the 3-foot safe passing bill. And what we wanted to do was just amend our resolution to include the chair of the Transportation Committee in the Assembly and the chair of the Transportation Committee in the State Senate. So we'll send our resolution to each of those individuals in addition to our Assembly person, Kevin Cahill, because Cahill's office suggested that we formally do that and then that they would also follow up on our behalf. So I motion that we update that resolution to add these 2 additional individuals.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so number 3, we've been discussing for a while now the new water filtration unit project at Mountain Rest Road. In 2016, the budget for that project was $4.1 million. When pencils were sharpened, the most updated estimate for that project was closer to $5 million, and our engineer's response was, well, let's see what the bids come in at, and we opened bids for that project a couple weeks ago now, and they were indeed very close to that amount. So we should anticipate, if we want to move forward with purchasing a new water filtration unit at our Mountain Rest Road wastewater or water treatment plant, that it would cost about $5 million in total. This is a 30-year-old plant. From what I understand, these units generally last just over 25 years, so it makes sense that it would need to be repaired now. We looked at trying to do some value engineering to maybe have a different amount of capacity at the plant, and it seemed like even if we were really aggressive in terms of scaling back how much capacity we would want at that plant, the most we would save is about $200,000, and then that would be somewhat of a roll of the dice in terms of how much water could we source from groundwater wells instead of buying as much water as we do from the DEP. That might be a risk worth taking, but even if we were guaranteed that we would source a lot more water locally as opposed to buying the 60% of the water that we do from the DEP. At $200,000, we would probably blow through all of that savings if we waited a whole nother year to construct this new unit. So what we're challenged with is that we have a really tight window in terms of we can take our plant offline and have a temporary plant while college is not in session. So we have a really short window. We can basically only do this replacement during the summer. And then every year that you wait, the costs of these projects escalate. And this is exactly the same thing that we're seeing with our fire station project. Every single month that you wait, the cost of construction from general contractors and electrical contractors, it just goes up. And we're in a very expensive region. Bill and I were on a call recently with some architects and some other individuals, and they said that we're in kind of this challenging area in that New Paltz, there's a great deal of demand for labor because of the college. So we kind of have like an upstate New York economy, but a downstate New York competitive feel to how much things end up costing. So my take on, and I was working with Ted Nitza, who's on our environmental policy board, who has a background in engineering, and we were trying to think of a lot of different ways to save money or value engineer. You know, we certainly could go ahead and hire another engineering firm to really take a closer look at the plans that Bernier and Larios came up with, but that would probably cost at least $30,000, and there would be no guarantee that they would find the savings. I think we kind of asked our engineers to look at things a variety of different ways, and I was pretty comfortable with the conversations and the responses that we had. Bill was at that meeting, and we discussed that with them. So, you know, this is going to be a very expensive project for our water fund. You know, in 17 and 18, our water fund budget was $1.6 million. About $300,000 or $400,000 of that is buying water from the DEP. We're going to add a significant amount of new debt to that fund. So, you know, one thing that we do have going for us is that we receive money from the DEP to source more water locally. I'm hoping if we can buy less water from the DEP, we will have not as many expenses in terms of purchasing DEP water. Therefore, we can then spend more money in our water fund on needed infrastructure upgrades, like 100-year-old pipes that we have throughout our system. So we're trying to balance several different things in that water fund. But I really can't figure out a way that we move forward. You know, I don't know how we move forward without replacing this filtration unit for $5 million.
It seems pretty clear that we need to move forward. I mean, I think there's no question about that. The question is, what are the implications for the water fund for this $1.1 to $1.4 million surprise, if the numbers are still the same as in the email we received? Will we just bond for an extra $1 million?
Yes.
Yeah, unless we can get that 300,000 USDA grant.
Yeah, I think there is a slight chance that we might be able to receive grant money from USDA, because now with the amount of debt that we have, so when we previously applied, and this was the previous administration previously applied to USDA, and they were hoping that they would get some grant money. They received no grant money. It was all a 30-year loan. 30-year loan is attractive, but the interest rate's just a market interest rate. It seems like maybe there's a way we could get up to $300,000 in grant. I would not hold my breath. I would probably imagine the best we'll do is just have to borrow the additional $1.4 million.
Yeah, I would operate under the assumption that we're not going to get it, but we'll still try.
Yeah. But I think it's somewhat of a moving target in terms of, you know, at some point in the future, if we don't source more water locally and we keep having to buy water from the DEP, and DEP water goes up on average 11% annually, we're going to have to raise water rates. We've only raised water rates once in the last 12 years, or once in the last 10 years. I think it was in 2012, New Paltz raised water rates. So we're trying to balance it all.
Well, we had spoken about at a recent meeting the upcoming need to replace the pump station by my market. That is failing and will need to be replaced, and that will be an expense. I think any responsible family takes a look 10 and 20 years out. These are the things we're going to have to replace a car in 3 years, going to replace our boiler, whatever it might be. I think as a village, we have some expenses coming up. And, you know, one of them is, where are we going to operate a new municipal center? We're talking about a fire station. We're talking about increased cost at the water treatment plant. I think if it hasn't been done, I'd like to see a piece of paper looking out 5 and 10 years. These are the capital expenses we anticipate, so we can make a good plan. I mean, that's what I do at my house. That's what we should do at our house, because we have all these looming expenses, and I think, you know, I should preface that, and I will preface that if I go back in time, with complimenting, you know, everyone here at the table and the mayor on their fiscal management, and, you know, you're one of the most fiscally responsible people in town, Tim. So there's no, you know, no implied criticism or actual criticism, but we're looking at some outlays in the future years, and I just think we should put it all together on a piece of paper and make a plan.
Well, what we do have, and it was like my second day in office, the engineers, they have this wish list of all the different capital projects that we have staring us in the face. So, you know, that list exists, and it has an aggregate amount in terms of probable cost estimates for all those different projects. So, like, you know, one of the big projects that we ticked off of that list was the culvert project that we just did at Water Street. And Rich Ruth at Bernier and Lario said that has been on that wish list for the last 15 years, and we just completed that. So, like you're pointing out, the sewer pump stations, I think we have 4 total sewer pump stations in the village of New Paltz, and 3 of them probably all should be replaced, including the one at my market. So they're all on this list. You know, we have all these projects sitting on the shelf, and we take them off the shelf and put them in grant applications as they, you know, that's what our Environmental Facilities Corp application was that we applied for this summer. It was the first time New Paltz had ever applied for a drinking water grant. Because generally what we've done is that, you know, the CDBG money, we apply for sewer, because we've benefited in that we have this DEC consent order, so that has made our chances of getting that award better. So it's kind of frustrating that, you know, A, we have a SUNY here, B, we have a DEC consent order, C, we got money for an engineering and planning grant for $100,000, so we could camera all our sewer lines to identify where we actually have problems, so we could come up with a plan, and we didn't get the CDBG award this year. So we have, you know, an outline in terms of where we need to spend money, or as money shows up or grant opportunities show up, you know, what, and that's what we did with the EFC application is we worked with our engineer and we said, you know, look at that wish list, prioritize the projects, give us the, you know, the 5 most important projects that needed to get attended to, and number 1 was the line that went right through the Palmatier property, and we know that project did not work out, where we had some you know, ability to take a closer look at solving that problem. We have the street that both Dennis and Bill live on has 100-year-old, really gross, tuberculated water main lines. There's lots of them.
So I'd like to suggest, I haven't gone through the budget process yet, but when we go through the budget process, perhaps we just have both our debt. I know this was really helpful when we were on the school board. We always had charts that said when, you know, the lifespan of debts and when they were going to retire, and we would try to fit in stuff so that we would have a ceiling on our debt. And it's, you know, there's a lot of moving parts, so you can see when certain debt goes away, the whole bands thing, you know, which involves that.
We have all that stuff.
And then we could use our prospective projects in the same light and just say, here's the prospective projects, here's the estimated amounts, and just have it all in one place. Maybe you do that already, I don't know.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the list we did receive. I guess it was about a month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, of all the potential projects from the engineers. It'd be helpful to get an idea of, I mean, there was no prioritization. It was just 3 pages of projects, so it would be helpful if we took that list and said, here are the things which we expect to break in the next 5 years. You know.
I have this conversation with like Blue and Rich all the time. I'm like, you know, prioritize this. You know, you have X number of projects, and their response is, any of these projects can move to the top of the list at any time. So like if something were to fail, then that goes to the top of the list. So, you know, we did that for the EFC application where we said, all right, drinking water projects, what are the most important ones? And then we also, you know, tried to right size the application based on how much money a project could be, and we applied for a basket of projects. So it's kind of art and science in terms of you have the wish list, you know, what gets prioritized. You know, it's like the Water Street Culvert project, that was on that wish list. It also got attended to this year because there was the estuary grant that allowed us to attend to it. So it's, you know, it's constantly like trying to fit different puzzle pieces depending on opportunity. So
I imagine also, plus when grants become available, it may not, so for example, when the CFA book comes out in the summer, you then take that list and you figure out where you can fit into that list, and maybe something that's lower on the list may get applied for just because it fits what the state is giving money out for. So I suspect there's a lot of things at play. I sort of want to push back and say, well, what about by level of severity? And I know Blue would probably laugh at me and be like, they're all like level of severity. You know, and as you said, and in a moment's, any day, it could change, because we get water main breaks that, you know, think are entirely surprising to DPW, but you never really know where.
you know, I appreciate that you guys are saying, like, let's have a list that prioritizes. I'm asking for the same things, and it does feel like a cop-out that we're saying, like, it's really hard to rank them, but it is really hard to rank them.
Well, I would imagine with a $1.4 million surprise, there's probably not going to be too many optional projects we'll be doing over the near future.
Yeah, unless we raise rates. So that's something that we're going to have to.
Do you want to take action tonight?
Although we would be remiss right now to not mention that we have done a tremendous job, and by we I mean you and everybody that works for us, in reducing the number of leaks and the non-revenue water that we have. So we're hitting this from all ends, and the numbers are quite significant in terms of making sure that we're reducing the amount of non-revenue water.
Well, also reducing the amount of non-revenue water, but also significantly reducing the amount of water that we use. So like in 2014, we were using north of 320 million gallons of water per year. And then every year subsequently, since we've been focused on repairing leaks, you know, right now and we look at this every single day based on how much water we use. And I got my fingers crossed I'm not even taking showers for the rest of the week. That we only use 295 million gallons of water for 2017. And it looks like
But doesn't
we're
that
on target
include
to do
the
that.
leaks? So.
It absolutely includes the leaks. So if we,
But we don't know how much is the leaks and how much is people conserving water?
We could estimate.
295 million gallons is what we're expected to use for 2017. So some of that will be, you know, about 35 to 40% of that will be non-revenue water, meaning leaks, fighting fires, public buildings, public drinking fountains. And that number really should be not 35 to 40%, it should be 10 to 15%, even when you have 100-year-old infrastructure. So that's what we've been working on reducing. But I think the other, you know, it's huge in my mind that only a few years ago we had used over 320 million gallons of water. And you look at the chart and it just goes down every year because, you know, my favorite example is why were we using 50,000 gallons of water every day at the water treatment plant, the wastewater treatment plant on Huguenot Street. And John went down there, turned off some valves, identified a couple of leaks, repaired them, and now on average we use 1,200 gallons per day.
Nice.
From 50,000 to 12,000. We repaired a leak on November 2nd on Main Street. We're using 90,000 gallons per day less just from repairing that leak. So 90,000 gallons per day is the equivalent of about $90,000 per year in this $1.6 million water fund. So we're going to find more.
So no one shower for the rest of the year. Just kidding.
Yeah.
Showers are overrated.
So, but to your question about should we go ahead and accept the bids, I want to get the language from the engineer. I didn't have all of that, but I just wanted to discuss this project. I think we can do it at our January 10th joint meeting to accept those bids. And we will be, putting together our 18-19 budget and understanding what will be involved and how this additional debt will impact that fund. All right, so we have this draft resolution regarding health insurance barriers. Do you want to comment on why we're looking to do that a little bit, KT?
I think all of us at one point in time have been asked as elected officials in various roles, how do you buy your health insurance? Do you buy your health insurance for your municipal employees with other municipalities? How are you cutting costs? And the answer has often been that New York State makes it really hard to buy health insurance together. So NICOM, which is the New York Association of Mayors, in their recent membership meeting and determining what they were going to fight for this year, one of the items was reducing those barriers to shared buying of health insurance, typically called municipal health consortia. We also, in my day job hat at the Benjamin Center, wrote a report, did a review of all the shared services. What's that acronym that I always forget? MDGB or whatever. The shared services plans that all the counties had to submit to the state. And part of that review was to identify things that came up over and over again for counties, and health insurance consortia was one of the main things. There's a couple places who have found their way around the regulations in New York State, in particular Tompkins County, but that was extremely heavy lift. So given that our health insurance premiums are going to rise for MVP at least at 15%, I don't know if we have the number yet for Empire Plan.
We're supposed to get it tomorrow.
This is, when you're talking about expectations of, the tax cap, 2%, budget's rising year to year, and your health insurance is rising by 15%. Other stuff's going to go if you want to make sure that you're not exacerbating the tax burden for people. So there's lots of other things that rise well above the 2% threshold, but health insurance is definitely one of the biggies. So we've put together a resolution to send to the state, basically saying, please prioritize these efforts to allow small municipalities to join. I don't know how into the weeds you want me to get in on the details, but basically to make it easier for municipalities and school districts to buy health insurance together. Yeah.
Basically in the village, we had a slightly negative tax decrease last year. The year before, we had a zero tax change. And, this is in the face of health insurance premiums for family plans going up double digits. Like, it's totally unsustainable that, such a big part of our budget can keep going up. With MVP going up 15%, I'm sure the family plan for Empire is going to go up. Do you have any, what do you know?
First, I have my disclaimer. My day job hat is working for the Empire plan. I do not. I spoke with Will about this afternoon. Since the membership of the entire plan has no impact upon my pay, I'm okay to talk about this. I deal with provider groups primarily anyway. But, this isn't just municipalities. This is all across the country. You look at co-pays, deductible, the cost of healthcare has gone up through the roof. I think it's impressive that the village does not charge its employees anything for their benefits. There's co-pays, deductibles all get reimbursed. So the health plans that we have as a municipality aren't actually designed for us, as at least the MVP plan in particular, because the Empire plan is the New York State plan. It's administered by a number of different insurance vendors jointly, and there's a certain volume of membership with that. I am all for anything that helps us reduce our costs, but this actually does concern me a little bit, just because if all of insurance is predicated upon your pool of insured people. If you take that pool, and right now you have the Empire plan and you have a number of other plans that people use because they have to offer their employees more than one plan. If you take all the people that are in one plan and you spread them out to several plans, the cost is going to go up for the one plan. So, and without knowing what everyone's paying and all the different insurances, it's hard to really get that data. Part of me is concerned long-term with this, but short-term there's a gain. So it's definitely worth pursuing. But long-term I have some fears.
I just want to understand what you're saying, because the challenge that we face is that we buy family plans at $26,000 per year. Like, that's how much it costs the village of New Paltz to insure a family. So it seems like if we were able to be part of a larger pool, that premium would be less.
For the second option that we're offering, but we're obligated to offer two options. And if the one option has its insurance pool rated to the point where it decreases in size, then that option may become more expensive. So I'm concerned long-term. I do think there's short-term gains, but I don't know if everybody is really looking through it with an insurance lens.
Has there been any analysis on this sort of thing?
Not that I've seen, and given that, if the Empire plan is across the state, it's all, teachers everywhere. The other plans, I don't know what Rosendale's offering as a second option. I don't know what other municipalities, I don't know what they're paying.
But our plans,
But
whether
that
we
would force other
buy,
ones to be more competitive, wouldn't it?
whether we buy from MVP or Empire, it's still about the same. The premiums are about the same.
Okay.
So
I have long-term concerns. We don't need to.
Am I
like-
hearing you right? But the rule, okay, so if everybody picks Empire plan, you're afraid that it's going to cost too much for MVP, just using our examples. And then people who would like to choose MVP over Empire plan, an unintended consequence might be that they
Insurance is-
don't get to keep the one they want, but for financial reasons, they might choose to pick Empire.
The advantage for employees of having multiple plans is they can look at the networks of doctors that are tied to each one.
Right.
And go to the one that they like. If one gets out of whack with price compared to the other one, then people lose that ability. So yeah, that's something else to look into as well.
Okay, so we have this draft resolution. We'll see where that goes. And then we have another draft resolution. So it seemed like this was a proposal that Cuomo was considering last year, where he was going to require the collection of sales tax on items sold to New York residents who are from vendors who are outside of New York, and it seemed like that went away because of some internet association that is steered by the likes of Amazon and Google and Facebook. So I don't understand why Albany did not proceed with that type of requirement. It just seems like that would be a really important change to protect our local businesses. They're not operating on a level playing field. If a local business is paying sales tax and you could just buy something from a state where they don't collect New York State sales tax, Seems like something that Albany was taking a close look at and then went away.
Well, Cuomo was pushing for it. I don't know if anyone in the legislature was ever pushing for it.
Right. But now Cuomo is not, has
Well, he
not
was
been
doing it
discussing it.
during the budget stuff in the spring, so who knows if it'll be brought, I expect that it'll be brought up again in the spring.
So we
Yeah.
have a resolution, just, using our soapbox to say that we think that's important, because I think that ties in with our sales tax resolution, where we've discussed the process, or the arrangement that we have with the town of New Paltz and how sales tax proceeds in Ulster County are distributed across the town and the village, as well as how that's calculated and how New Paltz, the town, including the village, receives 1/10% of all the sales tax generated in Ulster County. But meanwhile, we represent a significantly larger amount of the businesses and just all the sales tax that's generated in our zip code. And, we saw that when we looked at the data that we received from the folks at the New York State Department of Taxation.
Now, is this based on the purchaser zip or the receiver of the merchandise zip?
You're talking about
Yeah.
you're not talking about the internet
Right,
draft. You're
right.
talking about the other one?
Yeah.
This is based on the vendor,
The vendor, I see.
where the transaction takes
I
place.
see.
So like
Okay,
if you
thank you.
buy a hamburger at Bacchus later, sales tax will be collected using that 12561 zip code.
Is this an initiative that other communities are pushing for also? Or is this something that is coming from New Paltz?
Well, other communities have looked at, other communities in Ulster County have looked at this before. I think we were interested in doing it because we have this, we're different than the village of Ellenville and the village of Saugerties in that those villages get their sales tax proceeds directly, and our New Paltz sales tax proceeds go all into our town's A fund. And we could exercise our right to receive our proceeds based on the property values within the village, but it's it doesn't really it doesn't change the amount of proceeds. It's like we have things like the police, which is already shared across the town and village. So, what we were doing is really just memorializing that when sales tax proceeds are received, that it goes into the town aid fund for village and town shared initiatives, as opposed to like being confused about, well, how does this arrangement even work? But then it is really curious to identify how little sales tax we generate when, folks in New Paltz struggle with all of the traffic on our main street, and, there's a great deal of commerce that's taking place here, and, the more traffic and commerce that takes place, the more we have to pay using our general fund to haul trash away to the transfer station. We have guys who come in on the weekends and we pay them overtime because they have to haul trash away. You can go into a quieter community that doesn't have all this commerce taking place, and the expense is not hitting their general funds, but it's hitting ours.
I think that, and I have no evidence that isn't anecdotal on this at the moment, but I think once the tax cap went into effect, there were lots of things that school districts and municipalities started doing to look for revenue, right? So there was cutting spending got a lot of play in the press, but looking for other revenue, not as much. And this sales tax has become more of a target, right? But it's a much more volatile revenue stream. So the negotiations on how much local governments within counties get of sales tax generated in their counties is negotiated. It's a whole home rule thing that you need to get your local person. You might remember a little bit of a feud here a few years back. So the Ulster County Controller's Office did a report not that long ago that showed that there's a lot of variation in these agreements across the state. So some counties keep all the money, some counties give a lot back, and everything in between the two. We're generally a little bit high with the county keeping 85%, I think. I don't want to misspeak, but I'm confident with the generalization that our county keeps a little bit more. There's a lot of details to this, so it provokes all these different discussions. You know, we need to get internet sales tax. You know, we need to look at these agreements, right? And New Paltz is a giver in this math, right? So, you know, sometimes when we talk about federal taxes, there's giver states and taker states. Well, we're a giver municipality. And I've said every time that we talked about this, not that I believe in redistribution, and I'm okay with giving less wealthy communities and less resource communities a bit of our sales tax, but the ridiculously low amount that we get, given the pressure on our services as a college destination and tourist destination, we need to keep having this conversation until the next agreement is set.
Which is February 2021.
So we're starting early.
Well, and I think, you know, the world is changing too. The proportion of business that is done at local businesses or local malls, you know, compared to the amount of business which is on the internet. The internet is obviously rising quickly and will continue to. So it's important to kind of get a piece of that business, because malls are going away. You're not going to be getting that source of revenue is going to be slowly, you know, diminishing or quickly diminishing. So we got to hook onto the train that's pulling.
All right, so now we have people here. So we have Eve was gonna chat with us about something, rec fees or a rec fee recommendation, or we don't even need, I feel like the planning board is still wrestling with that conversation. You guys are just here to listen. But did you say that, KT, that Eve was here to talk about something else too?
I think she's also here to observe our rail trail zero place thing.
Got it, okay. But Ariana
Which we have
is
multiple
here
people here for.
to talk to us,
And Michael's here now, so.
talk to us about the open air market. So you want to come join us?
Sure. I'm sick, so I don't want to get too close.
But you still got to use the mic.
Okay. Alright. You're gonna share my Jeremy mic then. Yeah, sorry. I slept all day, so my mind is not in the right place right now. But we want to do it again next year. I did an end of season survey, which I sent you guys the results of. Not that many vendors filled it out, but that was okay. It was better than none. And I spoke with them all about a lot of the questions too. And one of the things this year that I found really didn't work was that when it came to the end of the season, the weather started getting like nasty and the vendors just didn't show up. So I just don't want to go as late next year, because it meant that like the money we were supposed to be getting from the vendors every week just didn't exist. And so musicians were coming and I was paying them to be there, and then like I was not paying myself, and so all of these things. So I just want to end it earlier next year and just say that's that, end of October. We're just like not gonna do this November optional. I didn't know that November was optional in the past. Nobody really told me that until November. Otherwise I would have like planned for that better and maybe not had musicians. But I think people really like the music, the vendors like the music, the whole vibe of the community. Like they're all local musicians, all people who live in New Paltz. So everybody was just really into that. So I thought that was a really important piece of it. So I wanted to be able to keep paying musicians to come. Overall, I just think it's a good thing to do.
When did it officially end this year?
So it went from June 18th to November 19th this year. So it was three Sundays in November. And that just like, it started, one of them was super rainy, and so we were just like, well, we can't, it was gonna be like too windy it would be dangerous to have these tents like in the street, plus like not worth it for anybody, obviously. So that was one day that I actually canceled the market, but it was, yeah, so November 19th was the last day, and I think we would do it where it ends, just whatever the last Sunday in October is.
Makes sense.
And, we started it, I basically just took the dates that they had been doing in the past and adhered to them for this year. But there are vendors who would like to start the market sooner. The only thing is that there isn't really a lot of produce until June anyway. So it's like, I talked to people about whether or not we should start in May, and then the produce would start in June. And then I thought, why don't we just bump it up a few weeks, start at the beginning of June. And I work at Phillies Bridge Farm also, and that's when our first CSA distribution is. So I know that there are veggies to be sold in the beginning of June, even though the real abundance starts to come mid-June. But I figure they can make it work for the first Sunday in June. And so I don't know if I sent you guys. No, it wasn't you. It was Alberta, but you and Alberta, I sent a couple, 2 little documents. I don't know if she distributed them to everybody, but one of them had these different dates, which is first Sunday in June to last Sunday in October. And that would be part of the guidelines this year.
It seems like one of the challenges with farmers markets in New Paltz is getting more farms to participate, and the farms sometimes get frustrated if they feel like a farmer's market doesn't have enough volume in the beginning for them to make sense, but it's almost like a chicken or the egg thing. Like, they need to be there to generate the interest in the farmer's market.
Yeah.
So, any thoughts on how we can encourage the farms to be there, or have a couple more farms so it feels more like a farmer's market?
Well, so one of the things last year, the market board was made up of one food vendor, one craft vendor, and then myself and 2 people who run other markets, Billy Golan, who runs the campus farmers market, and Katie Condrat, who runs the Kingston market, which I thought was just great to have all of their input, people who have already been doing this. But there was a lot of back and forth about how many produce vendors a market of our size could support. And I don't really know, to be completely honest. And so I was going based on what, we voted on it. So it was all done, on the up and up. There was no just I didn't make the decisions. But the idea was that we thought 2 to 3 produce vendors could be supported. And I know that the food vendor who was on the board last year, he's moving towards retirement, and he's not going to do it. And I think that and neither is the craft vendor, so I think we want to move to a board model that doesn't include any vendors, just because I think that it makes it more difficult for the vendors to not be voting in favor of something that's going to benefit them, which, that's why the balance was obviously that there were 3 non-vendors and 2 vendors, but it just kind of was the way it all worked out, because these were the people volunteering, and one of them had a lot of institutional knowledge that we really couldn't have done it. I didn't feel like I could have done it without that institutional knowledge this first year, but now we're going to be moving towards hopefully not having any vendors on the board, and I think that will help a lot.
Great.
And we want to potentially have more farms, and we certainly had a lot of farms apply last year, but a lot of them were pretty far away, and I know one Huguenot Street Farm applied pretty late in the year, so I'm hoping that they will apply a lot earlier before everything's already set, just because I'd love to have a farm within New Paltz address. None of the farms were actually in New Paltz last year.
How many farms do you think you had? How many people attended? Any figures like that?
Well, in terms of actual produce farms, it was 3, but then there were other food vendors that were more of the added value. I guess there were 4, because one was more fruits than vegetables, but 3 were more vegetables.
And attendance, any idea how well it was attended, and how many people average would come, or anything like that?
I didn't try to count throughout the days, but looking around, especially during the summer months when there's a lot of tourists, there was just foot traffic constantly, people at every booth all the time, and you look around and you're just oh. And anytime I felt like there was a lull, then there'd be this whole wave of people, and honestly, having the crowd waiting outside the bistro, all those people would just walk down the street. But I think a lot of those people weren't actually buying things, though. They were checking it out. or at least they weren't buying, like, a lot of the tourists aren't, basically, there's two things. There's the staple items that are the grocery items that people are going to come back for every week, and then there's the added value items that more of the tourists will buy because they don't need to be immediately refrigerated. And so I think the combination of those two things is what supports the market and helps the market survive. And I'd like to implement like loyalty programs or something like that, where like people who come 6 times or 8 times or 10 times, whatever it is, in a season, you could get a little punch card and then you get a prize or something for attending the market.
And I guess something that you're working on as well was making sure that any of the vendors are abiding by our plastic bag.
Yes, that was not in our guidelines last year, which was a huge mistake and totally something I regretted big time, because a lot of them just were trying to give out plastic bags, and like Don came and brought the extra like reusable bags that the village had purchased when the bag ban went into place, and the vendors all really liked that, and I said, well, what would be great is next year is if we could have some money to be able to purchase bags and then sell them as the market, like the market table could sell them. And maybe some of the vendors could like have them on hand and sell them also if people wanted to, and then the market would get the proceeds. Which isn't supposed to be a money-making venture, really, just like a way to help people adhere to this and not lose money on it.
Might be a way to get bags out to the community at cost.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, it seemed to me that it was very successful, especially for a first year, and compared to a lot of the other similar efforts. I think it makes a lot of sense that we'll continue, and I'm glad that you guys are interested in continuing to work on it.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I kind of felt like the community just loved it. Like, all the feedback I got was really positive. I mean, of course, the one complaint we always hear is about parking. So, I really made sure to have the vendors not be parking on the street and come up and park here at like Village Hall, just so they were not in the immediate spots around the market, and not affecting the other businesses. But vendors did tell me that people complained to them about where can they park. And I'm like, where do you want the farmer's market? But in the heart of downtown, like, if we put it outside of foot traffic areas, sure, there might be more parking, but like, then nobody who isn't going there specifically is gonna come or know about it. So I think that this is the right location.
I agree. And congratulations. It was I think very successful, given it was the first year. I think I was there about half the Sundays, and there was always a lot of people.
Awesome.
And I think on the point of whether people buy stuff or not, it's pretty well documented, the importance of farmers markets in cities and urban places revitalization. So as long as the vendors can sell enough to make it worth their while, we don't need everybody to buy everything there. I think it's a real important part of our identity, and connects us to our open agricultural spaces and reinforces that important identity.
Totally.
At least from where I'm sitting.
I couldn't agree with you more.
So, and this is not a way that anyone's supposed to be, making significant revenue, but we had discussed the idea of the peddler's permits and the fees involved in that, and the market sharing some proceeds just so the village can check off that box, and because we do have requirements that folks pay for peddler's permits. So
yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
So one vendor had come in and applied and didn't realize that I was like working on not having the vendors all be applying individually, and I think that would be great if we could just continue to not have, they're not like traveling around the village on days that are not the farmer's market, like peddling their wares. So it'd be great if we could continue with just like, I didn't actually fill out a peddler's permit for the market as a whole thing, so I don't know if you want me to do that in next year, if it's having this be an established thing that the street is closed and you guys vote on. That would be cool with me. But I can do it the more formal way if you prefer. But ideally, we could just pay the like is it $100 or $200 for the
It's
peddler's
$100
permit?
for a
For one-
one-year peddler permit.
I mean, if we could do that, that would be great, just because I know, I mean, this year, I just like for the last month and a half, I was like, all right, I'm not gonna pay myself to do this, because I wanna have money for next year, slash money to pay you, and I had said, like, let's see what the fallout is when, at the end of the market, and I see how much money we have. So we've got like $178 in the bank right now. So if we could do the $100 peddler's permit, that would be ideal. But if you guys really want the 200, I want to be on like, I want everybody to feel really just good about this whole thing, so I don't mind making that like the 200 even. But that's like what's in the bank right now for the farmer's market. And I would love to be able to spend some money on like bags.
Promoting next year.
Yeah, and advertising. And we did spend money on advertising this year. What I'd really like to get is a banner. I know Kingston has a big banner that goes like across, I guess it's Wall Street, that says like the information about the farmer's market. And I mean, at the very least, I'm sure Mike Beck would let us put it on P&Gs periodically anyway, because I know it would be part of his rotation of all the other community things. But I would love to hang it across the street, whether it's Church Street or Main Street. I don't know I mean, I've sat in these chairs, so I know it's not going to be nothing to get it done, but it would be a matter of like, who do I talk to, whose permission do I need, and how would we best make that happen in order for people to like really know about the market and promote it.
So why don't we move forward with for the 2018 season? The
Street
market
closure.
will fill out a street, sure, I don't know that we're voting on the street closure right here and
Okay.
now, but at least when we discuss this again, the process will include the market will pursue 2018 peddler's permit.
Okay, all right, cool. Yeah, that's fine with me. I mean, that feels fair. I mean, I'm named in all, like I require everybody to have liability insurance that names the village, the town, and myself, which is standard for farmers markets. So I feel like it would make sense for me to be the person on that peddler's permit, since everybody's naming me as additionally insured. No? Yes? I mean, well, who
We can
else
talk
would it be?
about it.
Yeah.
We can figure it out.
Okay. Well, I'm just saying in terms of them not being individually listed as a peddler, as part of the
Yes.
peddler's
Right,
permit.
we don't want to
Yeah.
need to do that.
Yeah,
A
we want the
blanket.
market.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, cool. All right, yeah, I mean, if we could just have it be that I could start, because I don't know when most markets start actually collecting it, but I was thinking somewhere between January and February, I would start collecting applications. Because last year we were super late in the game, and a lot of people had already committed to other markets.
Yeah.
So where do people find information about all these different things if they want to be a vendor?
NewPaltzFarmersMarket.com.
There you go. Did you hear that, everyone? NewPaltzFarmersMarket.com.
Yeah, it was already the farmer's market website, and then I was able to take it over and edit it, since Zach does web development, and he helped me do all that stuff.
Nice. Thanks,
Yeah.
Zach.
But yeah, so the vendor application is on there, and I'm gonna update it to be this year's market guidelines. I sent them to all of you, they're not different, except that they add the plastic bag ban, and that people are required to either provide paper bags or boxes. The vendors are required to provide that, and the dates are different.
So why don't you fill out two things? One, the peddler's permit for 18, and two, the street closure for the range of dates.
Okay.
And then we can deliberate on that at an upcoming meeting, and that'll allow
Okay.
you to move forward with letting vendors know that it's definitely happening.
All right, cool, awesome. Yeah, that's why I'm going away for.
I was going to say, when
Yeah.
are you coming back?
I'm coming
Is that
back.
known?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, it's known.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. Our lease ends the end of May, so we'll be back in our house June 1st. But I'll be back in New York on May 9th, so I'll have time at my parents' house before any of this to be like more present. But I'm gonna be remotely in touch anyway. Email is worldwide.
I've
Anything
heard that.
else?
Just, did you get any written comments from your vendors?
In the
Share maybe with us?
business?
Yeah, so I did send the survey results to Alberta. So I guess I thought that she would print and distribute that stuff, but but it's okay that she didn't. I can forward it to all of you if you would like. Yeah.
Did you survey
Yes,
only the
please.
vendors, or did you also survey the business owners in the temple and the residents on the street?
You know, I did not survey the business owners, but they were all present, and some of them participated, and nobody had any complaints. Yeah, I mean, they were all, I mean, some of them who thought they wouldn't participate ended up wanting to, like the florist, she ended up paying for a table for 2 different months, and it was, I mean, Augusta was super involved. A lot of people were just like enjoying it. Like Jordan at NCUT, he would just like hang out all day while the market was going
He
on.
was in the street every single time I was there for the market. just
Yeah.
hanging out.
Yeah. So I got no complaints from anybody. But I welcome people to contact me if they had any issues. And I think that's a good thing to do in the future. Yeah.
Cool.
But
Thanks,
cool.
Ariana.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. What? Oh, you're
So we're segueing to a new topic. I did visit another village business a couple weeks ago who was using plastic bags. The way the process has been working, people will contact the clerk's office or the Environmental Policy Board, and they'll tell me, and I'll go down and say, thank you for having a business here, but you can't do this. And in this case, the business was trying to do the right thing. When they went shopping at Tops or ShopRite, they would bring their plastic bags in and put their to-go food as a way of recycling them. But unfortunately, our law doesn't allow that either. So, but, you know, the bag law has been working, and I've never had anything but good interaction with businesses in telling them they're running afoul of the law. Everyone's been in the right place, wanting to do the right thing, and it's great to be in a community like this.
So I think that's a good way to handle it, is to approach the business and make sure they're aware of the law. But let's say some business is violating the law, how does it get handled?
Well, the last thing I say is I'm coming down, because if we make a formal process through the building department, they'd be writing you a $50 ticket.
Got it, okay.
And that usually gets their attention too.
Motion to adjourn? All right, Bill's going to answer that call.
Thank you for your
Thank you,
service,
Bill.
Bill.
Okay, so NBR update. KT, did you want to share something?
What you want to do, Zero Place Rail Trail?
Oh, sure,
first?
yeah.
I think it makes sense.
That's fine with me. Okay, so I
In that order.
circulated a motion that I vetted with our village board attorney, and I added actually a couple of comments that Bill wanted to include, but I'll just read it aloud. It says, "The village board supports the plan and intends at the appropriate time to approve a single connection between Net Zero Development LLC's property at 87-91 and 93 North Chestnut and the village's rail trail property where the Wallkill Valley Land Trust monitors our conservation easement. Such approval would be made provided that local code compliance issues and valid public concerns are properly addressed. The connection would include screens with plantings, be available for public use, and be maintained by Net Zero Development LLC, the property owner. It should be noted that the Village Planning Board previously considered plans that included 2 connections to the rail trail and found on the record that no adverse environmental impacts would result from either previously proposed connection." Yeah, I think she circulated that to everybody.
I don't
Or is
know.
that
I don't
just-
Jot it down.
No?
I put them in between each of your chairs, 3 copies of them, but it's
Oh.
another one.
Did you get one?
But it's also been, it was circulated by email on Friday.
Right, I didn't know what you added, that's all.
Well, I just added, you want me to read the sentence that I added?
Yeah.
This was just,
I got
and this
that
was
one.
also circulated on Friday. This is just taken from what Bill said. The connection would include screens with plantings, be available for public use, and be maintained by Net Zero Development LLC, the property owner. So that last sentence, because Will was looking to include language regarding seeker compliance, and then he said, well, since the planning board had basically looked at this through the lens of seeker and said that there were no adverse impacts, and that plan included 2 connections, that's why he included that additional line there. But I think what we're trying to do is just trying to move the process forward to empower the planning board that, our intention is to work with the Walker Valley Land Trust and the property owner to make sure that, this connection works for our community. And, this is something that we've discussed at this table when we were looking at how many connections that would exist in the NBR zone. Like we were talking about having, I think we all were on the same page that the old NBR language basically encouraged rail trail connections for each property, and we were all on the same page that we wanted to have a finite number of rail trail connections, and it was almost like a first come, first serve, but we kind of eyeballed where those connections might end up being. Like we have the BOCES connection, which is a guerrilla path, and this connection has existed for a while. So basically what we're doing is to formalize some of these connections.
Planning board chair, you have any comments or Zealer? Sorry to interrupt your huddle. Just wondering if you want to say, I think just, why are we doing this and how is this helpful?
Here, jump up here then, Michael, and use a mic.
So we had, our last village planning board meeting was a little over a week ago. So we had asked Christy DeBoer from the Walker Valley Land Trust and the mayor and Bill Murray, who's our liaison to the planning board, to come to the table so we could begin the process of recognizing there are several issues that will require the village board to deliberate on and make a decision about with respect to the land that you own along the rail trail right of way. This is one of them. There's 2 others. One will involve landscaping and the need to perhaps put some landscaping within the right of way. And we're waiting to get a report from our landscape consultant for the planning board, who's working with the applicant's landscape consultant, who put together a plan. So we'll bring that to you at some future date. And then the third one is there are stormwater outflows from the property that are proposed to go into drainage ditches on both sides of the rail trail. And the DPW is aware of that. Again, we have an engineering consultant, a civil engineering firm. So we have a civil engineering firm who's going back and forth with the applicant's engineer, and as soon as they're done with that back and forth and we have the stormwater all set, then we'll make sure that goes to the DPW. And but there might be some need for your board to have some input into that. As far as the access, what we wanted to do at our last meeting was to see whether there was even any willingness to go forward and allow access between private property through the village's right-of-way onto the rail trail. And the conversation seemed to be pretty positive, so Bill brought this back to you all. My I will say that it was only at our last meeting that the applicant brought up the idea of having only one access point, not two, and basically abandoning the one that currently exists, which was started when the park and ride was put in. It's certainly your prerogative, but I don't know that the planning board is settled on one or two or none. So if your motion is going to be worded the way it is, then that will tie our hands, but that might or might not matter. The other thing I just wanted to emphasize is that what we're really trying to get from you all this evening is just a sense that you're willing to go forward with this and work with the applicant and the land trust to come up with a legal strategy that will enable these to happen, and in which it's clear who's responsible for its development and maintenance and the liability issues. I also want to emphasize that you don't need to have everything ironed out before, should we get to a point on the planning board side where we're ready to prepare a resolution and vote on this project. If you all haven't made your decision, that's okay. We'll just put that in as a pending condition within there, that, whatever happens with those will happen. And we can deal with that later on, so.
Yeah, I think what we were trying to do with this motion is just to give you an indication that you shouldn't anticipate that there would be a hiccup from the village board side of this. And I think we're also trying to look at this not so much as only in terms of how this will work with this property, but we're trying to work with the land trust to come up with a template that we can apply to all the properties.
Sure.
So that,
right.
We don't want to reinvent the wheel every single time, so.
Right, yeah.
And, we have all these curious connections with it, like, for instance, the Rotary Park that's at Main Street and the rail trail.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a business that's interested in doing a better job of maintaining that, because now it's kind of like no man's land that no one maintains it. Mm-hmm. And I asked the land trust if they had any documentation. They had none. Like, it's just,
right.
We're inheriting, things were done with the best of intentions in years past, and I think what we're trying to do now is, create policy and procedures, and this is
and I think that's fine, right? And Christie acknowledged that, and if we can come up with something, and I'm in favor of that as well, and I think the planning board is in general. So that, that's partly why we brought this forward, rather than just kind of, saying, sure, go ahead and put these trails in, but recognizing, because apparently that seems to be, there isn't much of a paper trail for the current bridge connection that exists there.
Yeah, there, or at Bosse's, or or anywhere, right?
Right,
or
but
Village Pizza.
Right, but the park and ride was actually, a whole process.
Right.
So
you think it would?
So you think there would be, but there wasn't.
You would think the Rotary Park too.
True. Anyway, so we're pleased that you're willing to consider this, and pleased that the applicant is willing to, take on a level of responsibility that'll make this, I think, feasible to happen. In terms of the individual, so I would just hope that the site plan issues you can, as much as possible, leave to the planning board in terms of which ones and so forth, and we'll work that out.
Yeah, I just included some of that site plan specific stuff just because Bill asked that they be included.
And that's fine.
Because I wanted this to be as general as possible, just in terms of saying, like, the village board was generally supportive of making sure that this connection existed with the village-owned property, and worked with the land trust monitoring of the property.
Right. I guess my only caution would be about your inclusion of only a single one, because
why don't we just
I know that that's what David's position is, but we haven't really discussed it much since, as I said, it just came up for the first time at our meeting last Tuesday.
So what would be the flip side to that, where the planning board would say, actually, we think 2 connections makes more sense?
I think they have different value, and I'm guessing it was a question of liability that made you decide that you would not want to.
David, you want to join us just so you can speak into a mic as well? Share that one.
Yeah, of course.
It's funny,
the impetus behind this, the thinking about 2 or 1 entrances actually began from a conversation Carol Lee and I had that got us thinking about, does it even, what makes sense here, right? And the more we kicked that around, this idea of, we just sort of accepted this idea that there'd be 2 connections. One has always existed, it has this wooden bridge there, and we never even thought about it, right? But the more we the more we kicked around this idea, the more we realized that there's really no reason to have that northern entrance, right? Because we don't want to encourage people to be traversing through the parking lot. That's not the intent of this parking lot. This parking lot is not a rail trail parking lot. It's a parking lot for Zero Place. And since we were putting public restrooms in the center of the building, and we're making that a public amenity available to rail trail users, it seemed to make sense to have the main sort of engagement of Zero Place from the rail trail to be this sort of middle entrance, right? So that was the logic behind moving from 2 down to 1 and focusing on that 1 at the center of the building. Because if you look at the site plan, you'll see that path goes almost directly into the public restroom area. So anyway, to answer your question about that northern connection, we would rather our tenants and people who are maintaining their bicycles in the majority of the bicycle racks around the building to engage the rail trail either through Mulberry Street or through that central entrance and not be taking them through the parking lot. And similarly, we don't want to encourage bikers and pedestrians to be walking into a parking lot that they're not using. Nor do we want to encourage the use of the parking lot for that purpose.
It's also part of the thinking too that you're going to be required to maintain this connection. So
Yeah.
it's easier to maintain 1 versus 2.
Sure, yep. And we don't know the state of that. That specific thing was raised by one of the team members of Zero Place. Like, we don't even know the condition of that wooden bridge, right? But that's not the primary reason. The primary reason is really sort of the uses that we've been discussing.
Eve, did you want to?
Yeah.
But you got to sit and be closer to a mic.
I guess, my only concern is if you're trying to establish some sort of precedent going forward, I get the language of shared responsibility for liability. I guess I wonder if deciding it's 1, when, different sites are different sizes. Say there was a playground at that end instead of a parking lot, if we had that capacity of reasonableness and shared liability and all that written in there, but by deciding that no matter what size a lot is, it'll only be 1, may or may not limit down the line. And I don't. For other projects. For others. I'm not.
But
Specifically just says net zero. Okay, I guess.
That's like a totally new land use application
Right.
that will happen decades in the future, and that will be dealt with. in
Okay, I guess I
someone else's
understood it as you were
connection.
hoping to get some kind of language that could then be used going forward. So if that's not the intent at all, then I Well- retract that. I mean, We are doing the MBR rezoning, and we're certainly going to be informing that rezoning based on all of this. I mean, we've been going through these parallel processes where you've been looking at Zero Place, and we've been looking at the whole zone. So you've been talking about things like rail trail access just for there, and we've been talking about it for the whole zone. So it'll definitely feed into what we do in that rezoning of the whole NBR. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I have process questions too. Like, I'm still like, and I just want to make sure people have clarity on this too. Like, this is not an action, this resolution, this is a statement of intention. So, as Michael said, and I want to make sure people heard that too, like, even if we can do this, the planning board can still say, we approve contingent on VB approval of XYZ.
The reason we're doing.
Maybe being rail trail and YZ being other things. So there's a lot going on.
The reason why we're doing this is really it's a very simple thing. All we're doing is we're just showing to the planning board. So if the planning board is deliberating over like site plan decisions, and that the village board has to opine on, well, will this work at all? We're just saying that we're willing to
That's perfect.
move this
Yeah, no,
forward. That
that's
is
great.
all
Yeah.
Good.
that this motion is trying to
Okay.
do.
Great.
We're not trying to do anything more than that.
Okay.
So as opposed to the planning board saying, well, we don't even know where the village board stands. They
Right.
might say that we're completely opposed to any connection.
Right. No, I
So all we're
appreciate
trying to
that.
do is
No,
saying,
that's the whole point.
yeah,
Thank you.
that's all
We
it
couldn't
is.
even take action now if we wanted to, so, yeah, and as far as the
Okay.
single
Wait, why is
connection.
Why is that?
Well, we could, but we're just
I'm
not ready
meaning,
to.
we could pass a resolution, I mean like an actual action. This is a statement of intention to take action, X, Y, Z. I don't know how everybody feels. When you say handcuff, I'm like, oh, I want to fix that, so that's not, you're not handcuffed. I mean, should we say, would you suggest the appropriate number of rail trail connections instead of approve a single connection? Just somehow opening that up, so we're just basically saying, we'll make these decisions when the time comes, based on what is deemed appropriate.
I'm fine if you, from my point of perspective, if you want to say one or two.
I don't know enough about
Yeah.
the site plan to say.
I mean, we've never discussed more than two. There's always, the site plans always contain two. Yeah, and I mean, if you want to say one or two, that's fine. I don't think that,
We could say up to two, I don't know, whatever.
the intent is the same, because you're just indicating that you're willing to continue forward with this process, and that's all we need to know.
That's all it
And that's
is.
all
Yeah.
Yeah, if
the
you-
applicant needs to know.
I'm totally fine with one or two.
And, David makes compelling arguments, but there are arguments that really need to be made to the planning board and for us to have that discussion.
So let's just modify this that says one or two connections. Okay?
And thank you again for taking this up in a very timely fashion. Really appreciate it.
So this
Thanks
is,
for coming.
a motion to memorialize this intention. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Okay, so the next item we have on this agenda is Milton Preserve Rec Plan and MOA. What?
Yeah, MBR sounds.
That's right. Sorry.
Is that it? So, I don't know who wants to lead the charge on this. I did send out, as promised, the draft, our working doc, which, you can see anything that isn't track changes is our existing code, and all the track changes are reflective of the modifications that we made to the committee's recommendations along the way. So,
And I went through
How
your
do we wanna
document,
do
had numerous comments, and ran out of paper at home. The computer I brought with me to look
I
at
hate when that happens.
wouldn't take a charge, so I put some time into it and don't have those information with me.
okay.
Could I just raise three
Sure,
things?
come on down.
Three things real quick we noticed. One, I think is just a correction on the residential parking standards.
Okay,
You limited it at, 2.1 for 3 bedrooms, I think?
yeah, and
And we were-
again, that's a moving target. What I have in there is just placeholders.
Okay, so I could tell you, I think our intent was, if I remember, our intent was really to use it as a formula and to continue to go up a half a space per bedroom with no limit. Because remember, we had that testimony from the Sardas, I think it is, Roddy and his son, who were saying, in that case, he'd just do 6-bedroom apartments. And then we'd be in bad shape. So again, it was the formula, half per unit, half per bedroom, plus 1/10 per or 1 per 10 units. So it was 1.1, 1.6, 2.1, 2.6, just dot, dot, dot. Again, you're using a formula and it continues ad infinitum.
Okay, so do we want to just talk about parking now? Because I have a zillion questions. Well, maybe
Well, I
not a
had
zillion.
one other part to
Okay,
that.
okay.
And the other part was that on the retail, again, we were talking about a range between 2 and 200 square, one per 200 square feet and one per 500 square feet. I think the concern was if you go straight to the low end on that, then we're also offering, you know, a ratio for complementary uses. So we're allowing it to be reduced another 30%. We're allowing credit for on-street parking spaces. So again, that's a reduction. And then you're also
Is that
talking
in
about
that now?
not
Yeah,
having
now?
any public spaces available, so really having less margin for error. So my concern, and then the other part of it is, we're not limiting uses. So we have to keep it pretty wide because, you know, I think we would like to have some things like restaurants or cafeterias in some of, or cafes in some of the buildings, and those are higher parking and needs. So if we go all the way down to 200 or 300 per square, or 200 to 300 square feet per space, which is the very low end at the very start, and we're offering all these other reductions, we have no place to go. So that's where I would kind of encourage us.
Where are these
to be-
reductions? Because that's.
You're talking about the matrix, the 1x3 matrix?
Well, no, actually,
I
I'm
don't
talking about
think
in the commercial spaces.
Mhm.
The current is 1 per 500. The
Yeah, I
committee-
have one per.
The committee recommended
Question.
somewhere between 200
It
and
was
500.
200.
No, Joe told us
500.
it's per 200,
Oh,
per 200.
okay.
We, I think it's,
I think
maybe
we
you
have
guys are-
some,
But where is
I
the
thought it was a
language for the
range.
reductions? So can I just back up one sec? Because I did tons of like,
the language for the reduction is the matrix.
that's the complementary uses reduction. The other reduction is on-street parking.
And the other reduction is the 30% reduction.
Well, that's
the shared,
complementary
the shared one?
No, not just the shared ones, the shared one with the matrix. And then currently, in the current NBR code, and a lot of other zoning codes, it says, you know, the planning board has the ability to allow shared parking of up to 30% for competing uses.
So that's 14B.
Yeah.
Is that 30%?
Yeah.
You're talking about the off-site?
No.
Yes. Oh, that's only under off-site.
It's in the current NBR regulations, so it would be in black somewhere. It may
Okay.
be on the
It's for
next page.
nearby parcels, that's the off-site. That's
Okay,
the
right.
30%.
Yeah, you're right.
That's why I said on-site.
So,
So that's another.
that's, you know, that's a
Another kind of
reduction.
reduction.
And as I think I said last week, and it's been acknowledged, that most of the numbers are between 200 and 300 square feet of net or gross
parking
per parking space.
Yeah, I went and I looked at a bunch of comparable communities in my head. Places like Wappingers and Saratoga, which sound very different, and a bunch of different places. And quite honestly, it just made my head spin and even more. Like
Yeah,
taking
it
deep
does,
dives
it
into
does.
our own code is like, oh, great, now let's go do it with other people's code. And there's tremendous variation in how places are dealing with this, and my learning curve is slow, but I'm getting there. And I found lots of interesting things. And then right under our noses, the Town Gateway Committee released their recommendations for, they have 3 zones in the Gateway. This is, I'm talking about the Town Gateway that also had a moratorium and is doing rezoning. And they released their draft report, and they recommend something that I was going to recommend, so I was really happy to see that they were doing, is that rather than going with minimums, they are recommending maximums for parking. So I'd like my colleagues at the board table to consider maximums and to take a look at the Gateway draft And we could also ask folks that helped put this together. They had what's the word I'm looking for? Luxury is not quite the word, but they had significant grant money, so their stuff was done by Barton and Lagudis. And I think that both the parking recommendations and for the multi-use zone and the design standards are really nice, and we should take a look at those. I really see it's sort of two sides of the same, or it's two sides of the same coin, right? We're both places where we're the NBR and the Gateway, where we're coming in from the more rural town into the dense village, and they have a lot of really nice stuff in there.
I quite agree, and they have in their recommendations for retail business or service, one space for each 200 square feet of customer floor area. For an office, one space for each 300 feet of gross office floor area.
Right, maximum.
Yeah, well, it doesn't really matter whether you say maximum or minimum, because those are the numbers that developers are going to use. If you use maximum instead, that's great, because you've got all these other opportunities that Brad just mentioned, where you can have additional reduction. So shared parking of the 30%, the matrix use. So saying maximum is just fine.
Cool, I'm glad you like that.
It's equivalent to the same thing.
There's some other stuff in there as well, and I better understood doing my research and reading this report, like this issue of non-competing uses and competing uses. I think they articulate that really well, and how much you can be, they're giving up to 75% reduction.
No.
For
non-competing uses.
I'm sorry, I said that backwards. You're right. Non-competing uses, 75% reduction, and 30% reduction on competing uses.
Well, the thing about a mixed-use situation, where you've got residential and retail or office, is they're always going to be competing. The only way you'd have non-competing is if you had like a bank that had a parking lot. No, you had a bank with a parking lot. Let's say an M&T Bank. They do most of their business in the day, and the Indian restaurant uses their space at night when the bank is not, open for business. So those are non-competing uses, where you've got one thing that's operating during the day and another at night. But because you've got a residential component, some people may not be, going out today.
Gotcha.
Or so they're always going to be a competing use, residential and office, or residential and...
Whereas we're never going to have non-competing, because this is
mixed use.
Required to be mixed use.
Right, so
it's
you've got to
always
give
going
over
to be
the 30%.
competing uses.
Right.
And
All right,
again,
so they're saying,
up to a,
although,
somewhat. I mean, if you looked at David's ratios that he came up with when they were doing their studies, there is some ability to reduce. You're expecting some of the residents to be out during the day.
Absolutely, and that's why the 30%, but not the 70, right? If you have, a nightclub and a daycare, they can share a parking lot. That's
there's some people that have in their code these tables of time of day and like figuring out all the staggered. It's way too complicated, but the concept is
if you
what
get
we're
down
getting
to the
at.
basic nitty-gritty of communities, whether they're towns or villages or cities, there's a consistent theme through all of them that says those numbers that the town of New Paltz has got in this, proposed plan.
Right, so I think it would be helpful to because we do allow for single use. We do allow for exemptions of single uses. So can we say, in addition to all this other stuff, like, here's the single use maximums, and then here's the multi-use, and and I get that in concept, that's what the matrix does, but I'd like us to figure out a way to just do it with
We'd be happy to
language.
work with you on that.
Cool.
Can I bring up just two other things real quick? Again, a concerning thing on the recent change with Zero Click, where we went through all this rigmarole to get a protected bike lane proposed, and then DOT says no.
I don't understand that. New York State
I
is
think
asked
part
to
of
abide
what
by
you
complete
said-
streets.
Part of what you said was, at least the concern was, that it wasn't consistent with the rest of the street.
Or the rest of the state, except for New York City.
On
Albany.
routes.
Oh, Albany too?
So that's where, see, it leads to one of these concerns that, you know, the NDR that we're creating may be pedestrian friendly, but it's not going to be more bike friendly, because if you just have a shoulder, I mean, that's what we have now. But we're talking about adding that on-street parking in between the current shoulder and the sidewalk. That's going to make it less safe for bikes than what we have currently. So I think it's of real importance that before we go any further in the north, that we sit down with DOT and work out a streetscape. Because if you go to multi-floor north of Trip 13 without working this out with DOT, and we just end up with a bike lane, we're going to end up with 299. And I don't think that's the neighborhood that we thought of when we did the NBR district. You know, we wanted to have a more bicycle-friendly place. As a matter of fact, I think that was the only reason why Jacob Lawrence was on the committee. He pretty much joined it, and most of what he talked about was the streetscape, you remember, and the protected bike lane. Well, if we don't work that out ahead of time, I think we've seen from DOT, there's no way in hell
I'd
we're
like to
getting
get
it.
more information as, I still don't understand why that
Again,
happens.
it's consistency, and I understand that. What they want is they want drivers and bicyclists and pedestrians all to be getting the same message from the landscape that they're driving in or walking in or biking in, so that they all
But
react
it'll never
with
happen,
knowledge.
if, because you can't get
It's gonna
there from
happen.
here.
Well, I think what will happen was, I'm not as worried about what will go on with Zero Place, because I think whatever we have to do with the intersection of Henry Dubois and then Mulberry to get the Empire Trail through there, I think whatever fix has to happen at that intersection will pretty much fix whatever the streetscape for the MUR district is going to look like after Zero Place. So that I'm okay with. It's north of Tribune 13 that we better work with DOT on a future streetscape and then help find money to help pay for it before we go ahead with
So
the type of development we want.
what does work with DOT mean?
Means sit down with them, tell them, you know, the county's been totally in favor of MDR. The county has a transportation council. Get the county to help us work with DOT to convince them we want 32 North to look more like a village street than a state highway.
Basically, you're gonna call another meeting with the DOT, so the person from DOT who came to the village that day, and there were a couple of planning board members, I think David was there, and basically asked for a reconsideration.
Well, and it also, it depends on what orders they come into the meeting with. Any staff person will tell you, I work for staff, for
Yeah.
the county for 30 years.
Yeah.
You tell me what my orders are going into the meeting, I'll tell you what my decision is.
Well, why don't we start with finding out who was in attendance, and then we could call.
I would like that.
We could call the region director.
And then when we have that meeting, if we can have some Empire State Trail inclusion and, if possible, some greenway. Hudson Valley Greenway is a very good source for this type of complete streets. So I think, you know, trying to get those people together to influence that decision will help take us a long way to where we be on the NUR, and then lead us where we want to be on north of Tributary 13.
Okay, so streetscape on Zero Place is a done deal. They said, no, we can't do it the way we wanted to do it, just to recap, right? Just so I'm clear.
Just keep in mind, there's one important.
You have to come up and talk into the mic.
There's one important thing, though, that they were very happy with, which is the fact that we have the maximum shoulder there, right? We have a 6-foot shoulder. It's a big difference between 299 and this section of 32 North, right? Although you're absolutely right that they said no way on the idea of reversing putting the bike lane on the inside of the parking, they were very happy with the fact that they're 6 foot, and they would not allow anything more than that. Because beyond 6 feet, and it turns into a lane.
Yeah.
And people start passing and saying.
I mean, it's 6 feet, it's 6 feet, people anyways, left-hand turn in Stewart's, you're going around them with a 6-foot shoulder. So that functioning as a bike lane is concerned. But again, trying to get this streetscape worked out so that it's more, you can claim the space for the bikes and take it away as really an extra lane on 32. which
But
we-
Brad, it seems like you're encouraging us to recontact DOT.
I'm encouraging you guys to recontact DOT to try and move forward with the Henry Du Bois intersection, to try and talk to them about NBR North. If we can turn them around on Zero Place, great. If we can, at least we've got
Well,
a
has a
6-foot
train at the
shoulder.
station? Okay.
You know, and again, if we can, at least we got a 6-foot shoulder. We have to do a retrofit of one area, then we have to do that.
David, do you have notes on who was in that meeting? Who was in attendance?
So let me just bring up the third thing while I'm on a roll. The third thing was a lot of like the illustrated design standards, and I would agree with you, maybe we can look at these design standards, but I think that has to be a part of this. The illustrated was trying to make the communication a little clearer between the community and the developer, just to help the planning boards. I mean, we did have 2 planning board chairs on the committee. I've also worked as a planning consultant, and I know the more we can get to help communicate that, but it does 2 things. It also, though, when the neighbors come out, I'm one of the neighbors, when we come out with the community character issues, it gives you an answer.
I'm not against including them. I just am not a big fan of the aesthetic that's in them, and I like.
Well, we
what
can
they-
talk about that more.
Yeah, I'm all about providing more clarity to the planning board.
Because I think that's really
But I also
important.
don't want to handcuff them with, it needs to look traditional and,
I would just tell you, the more that it does look that way, that's one of the things that we've heard that people in Village like, or people in New Paltz like about New Paltz.
so
And
check
so-
out what they did in this, because they talk about
Let me have a
being
look at
able
it.
to do traditional, do contemporary, being able to do a nice blend of traditional and contemporary,
The only
and
difference-
sourcing materials from in or near New Paltz.
I'd love to take a look at it. I think the only difference that I would just preface it with is that's a throughway. So that's the only.
I understand that they are not
Again,
the same
slightly
thing.
different,
Yep,
but,
I know.
you know, we're right next to the historic district. We have a much better spot.
I get
than
that,
they do.
I get that.
So they're working from a bad spot.
Yeah.
Although it's very
I
good
also
commercial.
feel like a lot of the stuff that's in here, and as I looked at our own code and the other zones in the zone, this is gonna be the longest, most detailed section. And some of the stuff that's in here really should be considered as village-wide, just like some of the Gateway Committee stuff should be considered
I
village-wide.
think
But
that
since
we'll
we
do that.
don't have the money yet, but we do have the intention to do a joint master plan, the stuff that's embedded in just these smaller places could then be brought up to the macro where appropriate. So I feel like,
That was our argument for why we
Yeah.
wanted Greenway to
Right.
pivot and allow us to use
Right.
these funds that
And I
they,
think that's
for
the-
these master planning funds for this NBR work, because this hopefully would be
I
able
can
to
tell
be
you
used
we-
for master planning.
yeah, and
Did
there's
get
tons of stuff from
Millerton
both of these
the grant
processes
for
that we can
This
do.
year, so maybe next year.
And the
Oh,
design standards in
I got
there,
ideas.
the design standards in that are form-based design standards, which is what we wanted to do. But we
They
didn't
didn't seem
have,
that complicated to me.
well, we
They
don't
don't call
have,
it that either.
Yeah.
Which is
That's
good,
one of the
because it's
things.
not well branded.
That's one of the things.
well, that's because some people don't like the form-based thing, but that is exactly the same as form-based. And if I was an artist, I could have produced those.
Right.
But,
But we can steal from.
The other thing I would say.
absolutely. If there's a way to borrow or steal this, then the design standards where they have an overhead view of how the stores should be arranged and how the parking lot should be arranged and the.
I don't think any of that can go in code though. Like, I don't understand how
Sure it can.
graphics.
You do as
You have it as an appendix?
an attachment.
Refer,
Yes.
okay.
What you do is you adopt it as guidelines.
So it's in
That's a
somewhere
tricky way
else
of
that somebody
saying,
has to go ask for.
Do this.
No,
Go to
it's,
Or else.
E-code online.
you
where
go
there's
to
no-
E-code and you go to the attachment. The Lloyd Code has their design standards in an attachment that's just a PDF. and you
Okay,
click
I don't
on
think
it.
we have examples of that in ours, so
It's
that might be
also-
a new thing.
You'll find guidelines
Yeah, that's-
are not as directly.
We have schedules that are attached to our
Yes,
code. I
so-
think it's similar.
Yeah, but I don't think they're right there. It's just
They are
saying,
right
please
there.
see.
They are.
Yeah.
They are
Sure.
right there.
In ours?
I don't know that we
Yes.
have illustrations, but I'm not that afraid of
The
it.
illustrations, I
whatever.
think,
Just-
guidelines are a good
We'll
idea.
figure that out.
And the other thing is that then they're not only usable by the planning board if they want to push for a change on the site plan, they're also usable under secret. So it's a good idea.
Again, I'm not against design standards. I'm pro design standards. I just think we
Just
want to
work
have
them
the
out.
right ones because
I
we want the
understand.
right ones.
Those were my concerns with looking at the draft of what you had so far.
I'll take it.
Okay.
Thanks to say, people waiting, so, come on up.
And let me just say one other thing. Instead of saying Hudson Valley Villages, this document uses Hudson Valley vernacular, which is a far broader term and would embrace lots of different architectural standards rather than just say, oh, it's got to be in a village. So Hudson
Oh,
Valley
that would fix my
vernacular.
issue of
Yeah, it would.
villages.
It would fix your
That's
issue.
a nice fix.
Merry
Christmas.
Say quickly
You don't give back the gift to the
I'm
gifted.
kidding.
just to reiterate, because it's already been said, but, I remember very well what the DOT commentary was, and it absolutely viewed that part as the north of 32 down as opposed to Main Street up. Like, it viewed it from the perspective of a highway that came from the north, rather than seeing it as what if Main Street was to curl over. And so I think that if any conversation goes on, I think that's an excellent point, that it absolutely was written in terms of that, in terms of the shoulder and everything else, of what this highway already looks like, as opposed to what does Main Street already look like, so.
So that's how you
That's
frame,
important.
that's how you frame the argument.
It really is
Flip
read,
it.
yes, it's definitely read that way, so I think that's just a good point.
And the reason for that was we had divided NBR into 2 zones. So the streetscape with the protected bike lane with the parked cars was just for the southern section south of Trib 13 to Main Street. So that's the issue area with Henry Du Bois coming in there, that's such an important connection for the Empire Trail. And the streetscape we used, that cross-section came directly from portions of the NATCO, which is the National Association of City Transportation Officials guidelines. So it's brand new stuff, and they're already also using it in Albany. Just another thing, I think the next question might be to do with permitted uses and not permitted uses. And so previously, I had told you I'd, hand you out something that had those. And this is an attachment to your current E-code. You just go to the attachment number 1, Schedule A, and that is the current,
So this is the updated list?
this
So-
is the
This-
current list.
This is the current list. Did the committee look at this?
Yes, the committee looked at this, and
Oh,
then this is your current Schedule A attachment of what's permitted and not permitted. So I have highlighted,
So you, okay.
did everyone get one of these?
Right. I thought,
Okay, so are there, does this include your recommended changes?
No,
or-
this is to tell you what where we're starting, where we started.
Okay,
Then what we did was look at various mixed-use districts, and we eliminated the things that would involve drive-through windows, because that interacts with the pedestrian component that you're trying to, nourish. So you don't want drive-through restaurants, you don't want gas stations, you don't want, that's why banks aren't in there. Although this town study has another possibility for banks if you have them in the rear of the building, but that would involve...
what if you're just at a bank that didn't have a drive-through?
Well, most banks,
I know most do, but you could
Yeah.
easily have banks that don't, just like large cities don't have
okay,
drive-throughs.
but I don't
Like
know.
what we're trying to encourage is like a neighborhood feel.
Right, so if you could say a bank can be here but not have a drive-through.
Yep.
So the things that are in there, plus dry cleaning plants because of the toxic chemicals, same thing with gas stations. So those are the reasons those items were prohibited. And in the principally permitted section, the whole reason that we redid this ordinance was to give more clarity to the applicants as to what you could do as a principally permitted use. In other words, you wouldn't need to go get a special permit. So that's why that front end was redone. And, you know, we can go through that more in our next go-round, because there needs to be a little more sort of background study perhaps on permitted uses and principally permitted uses and special permit uses.
Yeah, I'll
At
put
the
it on our
moment-
homework to look at this list.
Yeah, at the moment, absolutely everything in the NBR requires a special permit, which means it creates tremendous problems for developers and for the planning board and for the community. And it's just very confusing because instead of having a clear set of guidelines, you've got a complicated negotiation process.
Yeah, I think everybody on the board is aware of that and agrees with that, although I do worry a little bit that we're putting special use permits on lots of different components, but
Okay,
it
well,
seems to be
We can simplify
a
that,
compromise
but
point.
the special permit uses were recommended by both of the planning board chairs, including Michael Zilla, who left, but we can ask him back next time. He decided those were the things that should go in, and Floyd Niffen, who was a previous planning board chair, agreed with those recommendations.
We've added, though, special use permits required for things since your original version. We added it to rooftop decks, we added it to rail trail access, there may be
Okay,
more.
well, those are pretty minor things compared to the uses.
I agree that in terms of scale, but
Right.
we're still doing a lot of that, it would be my point. If we're cool with that, I just want to make sure that we realize that that's what we're doing. I think, I don't have an alternative, I just think it should be on our radar.
The only other thing I would say is that, to me, special uses used to always be called specially permitted uses because they came with specific conditions. And if you meet those conditions, it's supposed to be almost the same as a permitted use. So what we're trying to do is provide some of those conditions. So they're basically permitted uses, but you have to meet these conditions.
Right, so we
for
do
X,
do
Y,
that, and
Z.
let's make sure in the
And so I
code.
think that's better than the open, just, everything's a special use permit.
Okay, so I saw it as additive to our criteria list, but what you're telling me is that in practice, it becomes special use permit if you meet these conditions. Like, so we have a list of 5 or 6 things for rooftop decks, and
Yeah.
I don't know if we have a list of things for rail
You
trail
should be
access.
granted, it should be like a permitted use.
I feel like that is super case-by-case basis, the rail trail access, but
But there are overall guidelines.
I don't know if that's explicit in the way
See,
we.
But we've got overall guidelines that go with the access. We're kind of limiting the overall number of accesses.
Well, that's still a moving target, but yeah.
Well, but I think, again, David's made it rather simple. If the parking lot doesn't have a public use component to it, then why does it have rail trail access?
Because neighbors ask all the time for those kinds of connections, and they're used throughout the village, where people walk across other properties to get to other places.
But I think a lot of what we've done is to try and link the sites. Again, we're putting those stubs for the
Yeah.
parking lots, and we're saying, well, parking lot should be, mostly to the rear and should have links between them, so that you'll be able to go to that next parking lot to get access. You don't need an access for each specific parcel.
But it shouldn't be about, like, people can walk from their residence to some other point in the village. That you're making the assumption that everything starts from a car, right? Like, I'm contacted by people who are like, why don't we have more rail trail connections so you could walk from the likes of Bonnecue View Road to the rail trail? Like, how do you currently get to the rail trail from Bonnecue View Road? You go to Boseef's or you go down to Mulberry, right?
And I think as we discussed, we'd probably like another access between.
I know, but that's just an example of, like, so it's not
I
about,
understand.
it's not about a parking lot that is creating the need. Like, people, go for walks or take their dog out for long distances, and they would prefer not to, walk on 32 or, more congested roads.
Totally.
Yeah, and I don't know enough about Zero Place's site plan, but, I mean, and there, I've said this before, I think, there's actually a planning word, right, that people create paths because it's the shortest distance from A to B.
social trails.
Social trails, I gotta remember that, the sociologist has to remember that, right? So you can think that they're not gonna walk through that parking lot or whatever you don't want them to walk through, but if it's becomes a social trail because it's a logical path. College campuses are famous for this, right? They have these broad swaths, and then you can see, like, in the grass where everybody just goes through the diagonal.
Well, yes, but we need to discourage some social trails. Like, there's a social trail from the student housing lot from behind my house.
I agree.
Through, private property.
Right, you have to take the built environment and do the best that you can to
But again.
incentivize the trail you want.
But you also have to
disincentivize.
encourage them too, because if we want to encourage people to not use their cars, we have to make the pedestrian experience better.
Okay, but again, we're just talking about the MVR. In the southern end, we already have Broadhead, Village Streets, and Mulberry. And then we're discussing what we're going to do on Zero Place for accesses. But north of that, you got Trip 13, so you need a bridge
Yep.
to access. So it's a natural, there aren't going to be as many social trails over because you need a bridge.
Well, Rich Casano has some documentation.
Right, and that'd be
saying that he
almost
had a
perfect.
conversation with the previous village board, and he brought the documentation to my office,
Okay.
and it speaks to some other document that he thinks he may be able to find that was, placed with the
Well,
county.
if
And
we
I
have
said,
an
well, go
easement-
find the documentation.
If we have an easement with them, that'd be
Yeah.
for almost the
He's-
perfect other access point,
Yeah.
especially if it's a public access point.
I've been having a couple things take 15 minutes, just waiting for a break in the conversation, but there hasn't been one. So, I wanted to build on one of the points that Joe made a couple times about the expertise and the makeup of this committee. We had what is now a quorum of this board, except for 2 meetings after Bill was elected, was at all these meetings. All the votes were unanimous. We had 2 planning board chairs, a former and a current. We had 2 planning board members. So the amount of expertise, when you did a lot of research, KT, and it was good research, and I looked at it all with regard to parking in other communities, what that ended up doing was confirming, in large part, what the original recommendations were in terms of the 200, 300, was good. So a lot of what we're figuring out has already been figured out, and I'm just wondering if, like, in areas like parking, I'm glad that we've confirmed, what the original committee came up with in large part. When I see the questioning of design standards, maybe we could do it differently, we should look at this, we should look at that. The current chair of the planning board was really enthusiastic and a part of the process that created the design standards that were recommended. And so we have already figured this out. I guess since I was one of the people who sat through 6 months of meetings, I'm kind of, I don't have as much enthusiasm for the length of the process since the committee's made its recommendation to the board. I'm not criticizing that everyone has a right to, everyone has an interest in it, but I think this village board got some good work product, and as we dig into it, we can keep having that confirmed. So I'm just looking to get to the point where we can take a vote and finalize the zoning. Yeah. The other question I had was if we use the term maximum parking spots, how do we guarantee and protect that we don't fall below what we need on the minimum side? I don't understand that yet with the change in the language. And the last point is, so I need some reassurance on that before we use the term maximum. I want to know how we are protected on the not having enough spots. And lastly, on the point of rail trail access, since we're using all these really hardly fought, well thought out formulas and projections on parking, if we should have a rail trail access into a parking lot anywhere. And we figured those parking spaces based on residences and businesses, and all of a sudden we have people coming in with their cars to walk their dog on the rail trail. All of a sudden we don't have enough parking in those parking lots. So I am in favor of restricting rail trail access to anywhere but the people who will use them. I think it's really good to have something at the bottom of Montague, but the notion of having rail trail access into parking lots as a possibility really concerns me, because it may skew some of our calculations in terms of how many spots we need. If all of a sudden people are coming in to use the rail trail, that isn't part of we've never had that's part of the discussion. Those were all the things I had to say. I'm done.
Right, that's an excellent point, Don. I think I've made the point several times that there's zero room for error because there is no public parking in this area. So if any project does not have enough parking, there is no way to fix it. Since there is no public parking, it does raise a very big concern for me now that you're saying this, because if people are going to go use the rail trail, where are they going to park? They're going to park in an existing parking lot. So, no, it's a very good concern to raise. And, excuse me, sorry, I'm losing my voice. I'm done.
I think there's workarounds for that as well. There's, you could do it by permit, stickers and windshields, that sort of thing, and that'd be up to the owner of the lot to enforce. But my concern about having access via parking lots is more of a safety issue than a parking issue.
I just want to say, I'm always going to do my due diligence, and you know me well enough to know that to be true. And when I first got on the board, you're one of just many current and former board members who told me in your first 6 months to a year, there was stuff that you didn't get into the weeds on, and you sort of regretted the decisions that you made because you didn't get into the weeds. So, A, I'm KT, so you can always count on me to get into the weeds, and B, you actually advised me to get into the weeds to make sure that I didn't do anything that I might regret later. I don't think all my research actually, I'm going to have to push back on that. I don't know that it 100% validated. I think it expanded on where we were at, and we're expanding, and we're trying to do it right. That's my intent.
Do we have anything else on NBR tonight?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and we'll be available to talk about the committee pieces if you need to do that.
Okay, but there's a couple, can we just identify some action items and who's going to do them?